She collapsed in the snowstorm until strong arms lifted her, whispering, "Not anymore. You're safe." The snow fell harder than she had ever seen in her life. Heavy flakes that blurred the horizon into a wall of white. Each breath burned her throat as she stumbled forward through the storm, her torn wedding dress clinging to her legs like wet paper. The hem, once pure ivory, was now streaked with mud and blood. Leela had been running for hours. The church bells had barely finished ringing when she'd fled down the back road, away from the small town that had betrayed her. Behind her still echoed the shouts of men, the snap of hooves on ice, and her stepfather's furious voice commanding the search. "Find her. She's his bride. Now she belongs to him." The word seared her chest more than the cold. Lila's heart pounded as she pressed a trembling hand against a tree trunk, gasping for air. Her fingers were purple and numb. She'd lost her shawl miles back when the wind had torn it away. The snowstorm had risen fast, swallowing the road and any hope of seeing the ranch lights she'd prayed for. Her stepfather had sold her to pay a debt. The man she was supposed to marry was twice her age and cruel by nature. She'd seen him strike a ranch hand once for dropping a pail. Lila had told herself she'd rather die than live as property, so she'd run. And now, death seemed to be keeping its end of the bargain. Her knees gave out, dropping her into the snow with a soft thud. The world around her blurred into gray and white shadows. She tried to move, but her body no longer obeyed. The cold had crept too deep. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breaths becoming shallow. "God," she whispered hoarsely, "please, I don't want to die here." Her eyelids fluttered. She thought she heard hoofbeats in the distance, muffled by the wind. For a moment, she imagined angels were coming, her mother among them, reaching out her hands. Then came a deeper sound, boots crunching through snow, slow and deliberate. A shadow loomed over her, tall and broad, haloed by the white storm. "Hey," a voice rumbled, low and rough, like thunder caught between mountains. "Can you hear me?" She tried to answer, but no sound came. Her lips were frozen. The man knelt beside her, brushing the snow gently from her hair. His gloves were leather, his touch surprisingly careful. He leaned close, and she caught a glimpse of his face, strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes like storm clouds, and a worn hat pulled low against the wind. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her trembling body, pulling her close. The warmth hit her like a miracle. She wanted to protest, to ask who he was, but her voice was gone. When he lifted her, she felt her world sway. His arms were solid, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Through her fogged mind, she heard him whisper something that melted through the numbness. "Not anymore. You're safe." It was the last thing she remembered before the world went black. When she awoke, it was to the crackle of fire and the faint smell of pine wood smoke. Her body felt heavy but warm, cocooned in blankets, softer than anything she'd ever owned. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, that the storm had been a nightmare and she was home again. But then she saw the cabin walls, rough-hewn logs, shelves lined with tools, and a coat hanging near the door, the same coat that had saved her life. She blinked, confused. A deep voice spoke from across the room. "You're awake." She turned her head. The rancher stood by the fire, holding a tin cup. His clothes were dusted with frost, his dark hair damped from melting snow. There was something steady and unreadable in his expression, but his tone was gentle when he approached. "You're lucky I found you when I did," he said, setting the cup beside her. "Another hour, and the cold would have taken you." She tried to speak, but her throat burned. He poured warm broth into the cup and helped her drink. "Don't try too hard," he added. "You need rest, first." Who are you?" she croaked. "Name's Aaron Cole," he replied simply. "Ranch out west of here. What about you?" Leela hesitated. Her real name felt dangerous. "Lila," she whispered finally. "Just Lila." He studied her face for a moment, as if weighing her truth, but didn't press. Instead, he tucked the blanket higher around her shoulders and turned back to the fire. Outside, the storm still howled, but inside, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid, because when he'd said, "You're safe," somehow, she'd believed him. The storm did not stop for 2 days. It howled around the cabin like a living thing, pounding on the roof, rattling the windows, and piling drifts higher than the porch. But inside, a steady fire burned, painting the wooden walls with amber warmth. Leela lay in the bed tucked into the corner, watching the flames flicker through half-lidded eyes. Her body still trembled from the cold that had nearly taken her, but she could feel strength returning slowly, each breath a little deeper, each heartbeat a little stronger. Aaron moved about the cabin quietly, as though afraid to startle her. He cooked, chopped wood, and fed the horses in the lean. Each time he came back inside, the room filled with the scent of pine, smoke, and snow. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was calm, steady, the kind that made the world feel less frightening. "Eat this," he said one morning, setting down a bowl of broth and bread. She managed to sit up, her fingers wrapped tightly around the spoon. You saved my life." He shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Storm like that, anyone would have done the same." Lila shook her head faintly. "No, not anyone." He didn't reply, just looked at her for a moment, those gray eyes, unreadably, and went back to the fire. The second evening, she woke to find him by the table, mending a saddle strap. The light from the fire carved strong lines along his face. For a long time, she watched him, wondering what kind of man risked himself for a stranger. She wanted to thank him properly, to tell him the truth, but the words wouldn't come. If he knew she'd escaped from a marriage deal, from men who'd surely come searching, he might send her away. Could I help with something? She asked timidly. He looked up, half smiling. You can help by staying alive, miss. I'm not used to sitting still. You will be, for now. There was kindness in his tone, but also command. Lila sank back into the blankets, oddly comforted by his certainty. She couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to her, not out of anger or pity but care. By the third morning, the snow had softened. Light spilled through the window in muted gold. Aaron opened the door and stepped out, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Lila caught sight of the world beyond, endless white, stretching toward the blue-gray mountains. When he returned, he brushed snow from his shoulders and smiled faintly. Storm's passing, roads'll be clearer in a few days. Lila's heart clenched. A few days, then she'd have to leave. But where would she go? The town she'd fled would surely be looking for her. Her stepfather wouldn't forgive the embarrassment of her disappearance, and the man she'd nearly married was not one to lose quietly. Aaron must have noticed a shadow crossing her face. Something worrying you? She forced a small smile. Just trying to remember where I was headed. He studied her, not fooled, but didn't pry. Well, you can stay here till you figure that out. Her chest tightened. You don't even know me. He returned to the hearth, tossing another log into the fire. Don't need to. You were freezing in the snow. That's enough reason. There was something in the simplicity of his words, something that reached past fear and settled in the hollow place inside her heart. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. The wind had quieted, and the silence of the mountains pressed against the walls. She turned on her side, watching the orange glow dance across the ceiling. Aaron sat near the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, careful strokes. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, the lamplight glinting off the steel. You should rest, she murmured. He looked up. I could say the same to you. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. His hand stilled. The ones who hurt you. Lila's lips parted, but she couldn't speak. He didn't ask again. Instead, he set the knife aside and reached for the kettle, pouring her a cup of something steaming. Chamomile, he said quietly, helps with the ghosts. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. Warmth bloomed through her hand, different from the fire's heat. You're very kind, Mr. Cole. He looked into the flames. Kindness doesn't cost much. People just forget that. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, the storm finally died. Only the sound of crackling wood filled the cabin. When she began to drift into sleep, she heard his voice again, low, almost a whisper, as if meant only for the night to hear. Not anymore. You're safe. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was that maybe, for once in her life, it was true. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, the snow around the cabin had turned to glittering silver. The world looked new, quiet, innocent, untouched. Lila stood by the window, wrapped in Aaron's spare flannel shirt, her hair still damp from washing. The storm had passed, but something inside her hadn't. She watched Aaron outside, splitting wood near the barn. Each swing of his axe was sure and powerful, the sound echoing against the distant hills. There was steadiness in his every motion, a rhythm that soothed her in a way she didn't expect. For days, she had said little about herself. He hadn't asked much, but the longer she stayed, the more the silence between them filled with unspoken questions. When he came inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, she handed him a cup of coffee. You've done too much for me already. He took the cup, smiling faintly. Can't have you starving while you're under my roof. I should go soon, she murmured, though even as she said it, her heart twisted. He looked up sharply. Go where? The trail's still buried half a mile out. She hesitated. I can't stay here forever. Someone might come looking. Someone dangerous. The question hung between them like frost in the air. Lila froze, her breath catching. His gaze softened when she didn't answer. You don't have to tell me everything, he said gently. But if there's trouble, I ought to know. Her fingers clenched around the mug. I didn't steal, if that's what you're thinking. I didn't do anything wrong. I never said you did. She looked down, ashamed. My stepfather. He sold me to a man. A rich one, cruel. I ran away before the wedding. He'll come after me. Aaron's jaw tightened. You were running from them when I found you. She nodded weakly. I didn't mean to bring danger to your door. He set his cup down and walked to her side, his voice calm but firm. You didn't bring danger. You brought yourself, and you're not going back to any man who thinks he can own you. His words sank deep into her chest, both terrifying and comforting at once. That afternoon, he saddled one of his horses and rode into town for supplies. Lila stayed behind, tidying the cabin, trying to still the storm inside her mind. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to hum a soft tune her mother used to sing while sewing. But as dusk began to fall, something pricked her nerves. The wind had shifted. Out beyond the barn, faint hoofbeats echoed slow, deliberate. She froze, stepping to the window. Through the thinning trees, two riders appeared, dark against the snow. They weren't. Her pulse quickened. The first man dismounted, scanning the area with sharp eyes. The second wore a familiar coat, brown wool, lined with fur. Lila's breath hitched. She knew that coat. She had seen it at the church. Her stepfather's man. Panic clawed up her throat. She rushed to the door, barring it with the heavy wood beam Aaron had carved. Her hands shook so badly she could barely latch the windows. The riders drew closer. One shouted, "This ranch belongs to a man named Cole. We're looking for a girl. Small, brown hair." Answers to Lila. Her stomach turned. They knew her name. For a moment, she thought of running into the woods. Through the snow, but she knew what would happen. She'd freeze before she reached the ridge. Instead, she sank to the floor near the hearth, clutching Aaron's coat around her shoulders. The same coat that had saved her life now felt like her only shield. Minutes dragged like hours, until hoofbeats thundered again, faster, heavier. Then the cabin door shook under a familiar knock. "Lila, it's me." Relief hit her so hard she nearly cried. She flung the beam aside and opened the door. Aaron stepped in, snow clinging to his hat, his face carved in concern. "They were here," she whispered. "Two men. They asked for me." He scanned the window, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver on his hip. "How long ago?" 10 minutes, maybe less." He moved to the window, watching the tracks in the snow. "They'll circle back when it's darker." She gripped his arm. "You shouldn't have to protect me. I can go. I'll hide somewhere else." His eyes snapped to hers. "No, you're not running again. But they'll hurt you." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady, carrying that same power she'd first heard in the storm. "Lila, you were freezing when I found you. You were half dead, and still fighting to live. You think I'd let anyone take that away now?" Her throat ached with emotion. "You don't even know me." He gave a faint, almost tender smile. "I know enough." Outside, the wind began to rise again, sweeping over the plains. But this storm was different, quieter, colder, like the world was holding its breath. Aaron checked his rifle, then drew the curtains. "They'll come back at first light," he said. "When they do, I'll be ready." Lila stared at him, this man who owed her nothing, who had found her half dead in the snow, and decided she was worth saving. In that moment, she realized something fierce and unshakable. She couldn't lose him. And somewhere deep in her heart, a small, frightened voice whispered, "Not anymore, you're safe." Except this time, it wasn't his voice she heard. It was her own. Morning came gray and heavy. The air outside was still thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm or a fight. Aaron had been up before dawn. Lila woke to the sound of boots on the wooden floor, metal clicking softly as he checked his rifle. He moved with quiet purpose, eyes cold and steady, his jaw set in grim resolve. She sat up, heart hammering. "You really think they'll come back?" He didn't look at her right away. "They came too close to stop now. Men like that don't give up easy. But they'll find out the hard way. This ranch isn't theirs to trespass." Lila's stomach twisted. "If they see you protecting me, they might." He turned, voice calm but firm. "I've handled worse than 2 hired hands. You just stay inside, keep low, and do exactly what I say. You hear?" Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Yes." He softened a little, brushing a lock of hair from her face before putting on his hat. "Good girl." By sunrise, the snow had begun to melt around the fence line, revealing the dark earth beneath. Aaron stood near the barn, watching the tree line. Every nerve in his body was awake, listening. The first horse appeared not long after, then another. 2 riders, same men from last night. They slowed when they saw him, broad-shouldered, steady, one hand resting near his holster. The taller one called out, "You Cole?" Aaron nodded once. "We're looking for a runaway," the man continued. "Young woman, about 20, came through here a few nights ago. Belongs to a gentleman in Red Rock. Big reward if you've seen her." Aaron's gaze didn't waver. "I don't trade in people." The man laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "You sure? 'Cause she's worth enough to buy yourself a whole new herd. We just want her back." "Back," Aaron repeated quietly. "From what I heard, she was sold like cattle." The man's grin faded. "You don't want to get mixed up in this, rancher." Aaron took a slow step forward. "You're already on my land. Seems I'm mixed in, whether I like it or not." The shorter rider shifted uneasily. "He don't mean no harm." "Then ride out," Aaron said. "While I'm still asking nice." The tall one spat into the snow. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe." Aaron's voice dropped low, almost a growl. "But it's my mistake to make." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the men turned their horses, muttering under their breath as they rode back toward the trees. Aaron watched them disappear into the frost-hazed distance. He knew they weren't done. Men like that didn't threaten and ride away. They'd wait, circle back after dark. He turned and headed for the cabin. Lila stood by the door, pale and trembling. She'd heard every word. "They'll come back, won't they?" she whispered. He nodded, setting his rifle on the table. "Most likely. Then we should leave." He shook his head. "They'll expect that. And out there, you'd freeze or get caught before sunset." Her voice broke. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Aaron stepped closer, his expression softening. "Lila, look at me." She lifted her eyes, tears glinting like morning dew. "You didn't bring trouble here," he said gently. "Trouble comes on its own, but I won't let it take you." Her chest tightened. Why? Why risk everything for someone you barely know? He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire as if searching for the right words. Because once, someone risked it all for me. She waited, heart aching. My wife, he said finally. 5 winters ago, she dragged me out of a river when my horse fell through the ice. Froze her own hands, saving me. Didn't make it through the fever that followed. Lila's eyes widened. I'm so sorry. He nodded once, jaw tight. After she died, I promised myself I'd never stand by while someone else froze. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sacred. Lila reached for his hand, hesitant at first, then firm. You kept your promise. For the first time in years, he smiled, small, genuine, a light that melted the cold around them. That night, Aaron prepared. He shuttered the windows, loaded the rifle, and set the lantern low. Lila helped as best she could, laying blankets across the door to block the draft. Every movement was quiet, measured. The cabin pulsed with tension and the faint crackle of the fire. When the sound finally came, hoofbeats. Slow and deliberate, it was almost a relief. Aaron looked at her, his voice low but steady. Stay behind the hearth. Don't move unless I tell you. Her pulse roared in her ears, but she nodded. Outside, the horses stopped. Boots crunched against the porch. Then a hard knock rattled the door. Evening, Cole, a voice sneered. We came to collect what's ours. Aaron stepped forward, rifle in hand, and opened the door just wide enough for the cold wind to rush in. His silhouette filled the frame, tall and unmoving. She's not yours, he said quietly, and she's not going anywhere. The man smirked. You think you can stop us? Aaron's grip tightened on the rifle. I know I can. Behind him, Lila pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling not from fear, but something fiercer, because for the first time in her life, someone was standing for her. Someone who meant it when he said, not anymore. You're safe. The wind howled through the cracks of the door, carrying with it the scent of gun oil and tension. Aaron stood firm, the barrel of his rifle gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Outside, 2 figures loomed against the snow faces, shadowed, hands hovering near their weapons. The taller one sneered. You're a fool, Cole. That girl's worth a fortune. Aaron's eyes were sharp, cold. Then it's a fortune you'll never see. The shorter man shifted uneasily. We don't gotta do this. Let's just take her try. Aaron cut in. The taller man's hand twitched toward his gun. The shot split the silence. Aaron's rifle cracked first, clean, controlled. The man's hat flew off as he stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder with a curse. His horse spooked, rearing and bolting into the dark. The second man froze, hands shaking. I ain't dying for her. He dropped his gun and fled, disappearing into the snow, like a ghost swallowed by the storm. Aaron didn't move until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then, only then, he lowered his rifle. Inside, Lila was crouched behind the hearth, tears streaking her cheeks. The echo of the gunshot still trembled through her bones. Aaron, her voice was small, trembling. He turned, eyes soft again. It's over. She ran to him, hands clutching his coat. You could have been killed. He gave a tired half smile. Wouldn't be the first time I stared down a bullet. But up close, she could see his hands trembling just slightly. The calm, the control, it was holding by a thread. Without thinking, she reached up and pressed her hand against his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. He blinked, the warmth of her touch grounding him. You don't need to thank me, Lila. Yes, I do. Her voice cracked. No one's ever fought for me before. The firelight flickered across his face. You shouldn't have to earn that. He stepped outside a few minutes later to check the damage. Snow drifted quietly now, the worst of the storm spent. He found blood on the porch, dark stains already freezing into the wood, but no bodies. They'd be back. Or send others. Aaron knew men like that. They didn't quit after one loss. Greed made them stupid, but persistence made them dangerous. He stood there a long moment, his breath fogging the air. His ranch had always been a place of silence and ghosts until her. Now, it was worth fighting for again. When he went back inside, Lila had lit the lantern brighter, chasing the shadows from the corners. She looked up as he entered, fear still hiding behind her eyes. They're gone. For now. Her shoulders slumped, relief mingling with exhaustion. You should rest. He chuckled softly, setting the rifle by the wall. You sound like my late wife. Lila hesitated. You still love her. He looked toward the fire, its glow dancing over his weathered face. Always will. But love doesn't die with the person, Lila. It changes. Becomes part of how you live. After her heart squeezed at his words, that night, neither slept much. Every creak of the wind made them flinch. Every sound outside pulled Aaron's hand toward his gun. Sometime near dawn, Lila spoke softly into the dim light. What'll happen now? Aaron, sitting by the window, glanced over. I'll go into town at first light. Talk to Sheriff Holden. Tell him what happened. And me? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. You'll stay here until it's safe. Her gaze dropped. And after that, Aaron didn't answer right away. The truth was he didn't know. Maybe she'd want to leave, find her own way. Maybe she should. The world outside could chew up a girl like her, but it could also offer freedom if she dared to claim it. But deep down, He already knew what he wanted her to say. When he finally looked at her, she was watching him with those wide, tired eyes, hope and fear tangled together. I don't want to run anymore, she said quietly. Not if it means leaving the only place I've felt safe. Aaron's throat tightened. You've got my word, he said, his voice low and certain. No one will ever take that from you again. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Then I'll stay. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentler this time, soft as a promise. Inside, for the first time in years, warmth spread through the cabin that had long forgotten what home felt like. Aaron looked at her across the firelight, and something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, new, and alive. The morning dawned pale and cold, a thin veil of frost stretching across the valley. Aaron saddled his horse before sunrise, the familiar creak of leather echoing through the barn. Lila watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, his coat still draped over her shoulders like a shield. You don't have to go, she said softly. What if they're waiting? He tightened the strap and gave her a reassuring look. They won't be, not after last night. But what if they come back? Aaron paused, resting a hand on the saddle horn. Then they'll find me waiting. There was no bravado in his tone, just quiet certainty, the kind that made her chest ache. He swung up onto his horse. Lock the door behind me. Keep the rifle close. Lila nodded, but her eyes followed him long after he disappeared into the snow-covered trees. It was nearly noon before the sound of hooves broke the silence again. Lila rushed to the window, her heart leaping, then stuttering. Aaron wasn't alone. Beside him rode a man in a brown duster and a wide-brimmed hat, a sheriff's star glinting on his chest. His expression was unreadable as they dismounted and approached the cabin. Lila's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Her heart raced. What if Aaron told him everything? What if they sent her back? The knock was gentle but firm. Aaron's voice followed. It's us, Lila. You can open up. She did, hesitantly. The sheriff removed his hat as he entered, his sharp blue eyes scanning her quickly before settling on the fire. Name's Holden, he said in a steady drawl. Aaron tells me you ran into some trouble. Lila swallowed. Yes, sir. Mind telling me what kind? Aaron stepped forward before she could answer. 2 men came here last night. Said they were looking for her. One's wounded, the other's gone to ground. Holden's gaze sharpened. You shoot him. Aaron didn't flinch. He drew first. The sheriff nodded slowly, then turned back to Lila. You recognize their names? She hesitated. Jeb Carter and Roy. Holden's brows furrowed. Carter, the same one that runs the trade post up north. Lila nodded weakly. He bought me. The words fell heavy into the room. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Bought you. Aaron's hand curled into a fist at his side. Lila's voice broke. My stepfather sold me to him for 3 horses and a wagon. I tried to run before the wedding. They came after me. Holden exhaled sharply, setting his hat down on the table. Lord Almighty. For a long time, no one spoke. Only the fire cracked softly between them. When Holden finally did speak, his tone was firm but not unkind. You're safe now, miss. I'll send a rider to town. Carter'll answer for this. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide. And me, what happens to me? The sheriff looked to Aaron, then back to her. You can stay here a while, till things are settled. I'll make sure no one comes near without my say. Aaron nodded once, grateful. I'll see to her. Holden gave him a long look, the kind shared between men who understood things words couldn't carry. You always did keep to yourself, Cole. Guess you finally found a reason not to. Aaron's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Maybe so. After the sheriff left, the quiet felt heavier than before. Lila stood by the window, watching the 2 men ride off until they vanished into the pines. He believes me. Aaron nodded. He does. She turned toward him, her eyes red from crying. I thought he'd take me away. Aaron's jaw tightened. He won't, not unless you ask him to. I don't want to go, she whispered. Not anymore. He stepped closer, his hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Then you'll stay. As long as you need. She looked up at him, this quiet, guarded man who had risked his life for a stranger, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile without fear. That night, the storm clouds broke, and the moon rose clear over the mountains. Aaron sat by the fire, mending a torn glove, while Lila hummed softly as she stitched a rip in one of his shirts. The cabin glowed with a strange, fragile peace. Thank you, she said suddenly. He looked up. For what? For believing me. Aaron smiled faintly. You didn't need to earn that either. Her chest warmed at the words. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was full, alive, almost tender. Outside, the snow glimmered beneath the moonlight like a world being remade. Inside, 2 hearts began to thaw from the cold they had both carried too long. The days that followed were quieter, though not empty. The snow softened into slush. The river began to murmur again beneath the ice, and the cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with gentle rhythm. Lila began helping around the place, sweeping floors, tending to the fire, mending clothes, and learning to cook with what little they had. Aaron never asked her to, but she needed to do something. It made her feel alive again. One morning, she was kneeling by the hearth, flour on her hands. When Aaron came in from the barn, his coat dusted white from hay and frost. He stopped at the sight of her barefoot, cheeks flushed from the firelight, a loose strand of hair falling across her face. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. "You'll spoil me if you keep cooking like that," he said, his voice low and warm. She laughed softly. "Then you'll have to get used to it." Aaron tilted his head, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. "That's so." She met his gaze, teasing but shy. Maybe. The look that passed between them was brief, but it lingered like the last spark of a fire, refusing to die out. They fell into an easy rhythm. Aaron taught her how to feed the horses and chop kindling properly, laughing when her first few swings nearly missed the log. "Like this," he said, moving behind her, his hand guiding hers around the axe handle. "You don't need to fight it. Just let the weight do the work." His breath was warm against her ear, his voice steady, and for a heartbeat, the world stood still. When she finally brought the axe down cleanly through the wood, he grinned. "See? Told you." Lila blushed, smiling despite herself. "Maybe I'm just a quick learner, or maybe I'm a good teacher," he said softly. That earned him a small laugh, the kind of sound he hadn't heard in his cabin for years. By evening, the two of them would sit by the fire. The quiet stretched between them like a thread neither wanted to break. Sometimes, Aaron would read aloud from an old book, a weathered collection of poems left behind by his late wife. Lila would listen, her eyes tracing the movement of his lips more than the meaning of the words. When he closed the book, she whispered, "She must have loved when you read to her." Aaron stared at the flames for a long moment before answering. "She did," said. My voice made the world sound softer than it was. Lila's throat tightened. She was right. He looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken flickered in his eyes, a longing he didn't want to name, but he turned away before it could become more. One afternoon, Aaron rode into town for supplies, leaving Lila alone for the first time since the night of the shooting. The silence pressed around her, too familiar, too heavy. She busied herself with chores, but when she passed the mirror hanging near the door, she stopped. For the first time, she saw not the frightened girl who had collapsed in the snow but someone steadier. Clearer, eyed. The bruises had faded. Her hands were strong now. Her heart still trembled, but not with fear. When Aaron returned, she was on the porch, her hair catching the evening light. He stopped short, watching her like she was something he hadn't realized he'd been searching for. "You look different," he said quietly. She smiled. "Maybe I am." He tied his horse, eyes still on her. "Good. You deserve to be." That night, the cabin felt warmer than usual. Aaron poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. They sat close, their knees almost touching. "Sheriff sent word," Aaron said after a while. "Carter's in custody. Won't be bothering anyone again." Lila stared into her cup, silent. Relief and fear tangled in her chest. "So, it's over. For him, yeah?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And for me?" He hesitated. "That's up to you, Lila." The way he said her name, gentle, steady, full of quiet respect, made her heart ache. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Not yet." He didn't reply. Instead, he reached out and laid his rough, calloused hand over hers. The world outside was still cold and wild, but inside that small cabin, everything felt softer. Neither of them spoke again, but both knew something had shifted between them. Not just gratitude, not just safety, something that had been waiting, quietly, beneath all the snow and silence. By March, the snow began to melt. Streams of water trickled from the mountains, turning the frozen earth to soft mud and the fields to misty green. The world was changing and so were they. The cabin that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a home. Aaron built a small fence near the barn where the snow had receded, while Lila planted the first shoots of early spring herbs near the window. When the sun broke through, after days of rain, she caught him, watching her from the porch, arms crossed, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "What?" she teased, brushing dirt from her hands. He shook his head. "Didn't think the place could look any prettier till you showed up with those flowers." Her laugh rang light and easy. "You flatter me, Mr. Cole." He tilted his hat down to hide his grin. Just telling the truth. Something about the way he said it made her heart flutter. She turned away quickly, pretending to fuss over the seedlings, but her cheeks burned all the same. That evening, a golden sunset bled across the sky, painting the world in soft amber. Aaron stood by the corral, oiling a saddle, when he heard her footsteps approach. "You work too much," she said, coming to stand beside him. He chuckled. "Work's the only thing that don't run away." Lila hesitated. "You think I'll run away?" He looked at her then, eyes narrowing slightly in that quiet, thoughtful way of his. "No," he said after a moment. "Not anymore." Her breath caught at the softness in his tone. "You sound sure." "I am." He set the saddle aside. "I've seen what scared looks like, Lila. You don't wear it anymore." She swallowed. "You're the reason for that." He started to speak, then stopped, his jaw flexing as though the words he wanted to say were too big for the quiet between them. Instead, he reached up and brushed a speck of dirt from her cheek, his fingers rough. "Careful. You did that yourself," he murmured. Her heart thundered. "Maybe, but you were the one who taught me I could." The air between them shimmered thick with something fragile and real. For the first time, Lila didn't look away. Later that night, as rain pattered gently on the roof, they sat by the fire again. The warmth cast a golden glow across his face, deepening the lines of worry and weather, but his eye steady and kind held something gentler now. She spoke first. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" He raised a brow. "This ain't quiet enough for you." She smiled faintly. "I mean before me." Aaron was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Quiet's easier, but it ain't living. It's just waiting for something that never comes." Her heart tightened. And now, he met her eyes across the fire. "Now, it feels like maybe it came after all." Her breath hitched. The air felt too full, too charged. She set down her cup before she dropped it. "Aaron," he leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "You don't owe me anything. Lila, you don't need to stay out of gratitude. I'm not." Her voice trembled. "I'm staying because I want to." He looked at her, then really looked. The flicker of the flames caught in his eyes like starlight, and she could see the war inside him: duty versus longing, restraint versus need. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "You deserve someone who hasn't already lost too much." She rose from her chair, moving closer until the hem of her skirt brushed his boots. "Maybe I deserve someone who knows what losing feels like," she whispered. "Someone who'd never let it happen again." Aaron stood slowly, towering above her, his breath unsteady. "You sure about this, Lila?" She nodded, tears shining in her eyes, but her voice sure. "I've never been more sure of anything." He didn't move for a moment, just looked at her, as though committing her to memory. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His thumb brushed her cheek. Rough from work, but tender in its touch. "You're safe, you hear me?" he murmured. "With me always." And when he kissed her so reverently, it wasn't the desperate kiss of two lost souls, but the promise of something long awaited finally found. The rain outside fell harder, drumming against the roof like applause. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his chest, his heart beating steady beneath her ear. Neither spoke, because there was no need. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of warmth, of hope, of home. Spring came slow to the valley, but peace came slower. For a while, it was perfect. The fields began to green. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. And real laughter echoed through Aaron's cabin again. Lila filled it with warmth. And for the first time in years, Aaron allowed himself to believe he could have a future again. But peace never lasted long for men who had enemies. It was a Sunday afternoon when the first shadow fell. Aaron had gone to mend the north fence, while Lila was inside baking bread. The smell of yeast filled the cabin, soft and sweet. When she heard the faint crunch of hooves outside to light to be Aaron's horse, she froze. The sound came again, closer this time. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of two riders. One of them, broad-shouldered with a bandaged arm, made her blood run cold. Jeb Carter. He wasn't in jail. Lila's heart hammered as she backed away from the window. The sheriff must have released him, maybe a bribe, maybe a lie, but none of that mattered now. He'd come back for her. The door creaked open before she could bolt it. Well, Jeb drawled, his voice thick with malice. "Ain't this a pretty picture?" The other man smirked. "Told you she'd be here." Lila's hands trembled. "The sheriff, he knows." Jeb laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Sheriff ain't here now, sweetheart. And this time, you're coming back where you belong." "I don't belong to you," she said, voice quivering but steady. He took a slow step forward. "You do, by law." Aaron's voice thundered from behind them. "You wouldn't know law if it bit you." The men spun. Aaron stood in the doorway, rifle leveled, eyes hard as iron. "Step away from her," he said, his tone calm but deadly. Jeb's smirk faltered. "You wouldn't shoot me, Cole. I've got the sheriff in my pocket." "Then I'll write him a letter," Aaron said flatly. After the two men reached for their guns, but Aaron was faster. His first shot split the air, shattering the silence. The second man went down hard, his weapon clattering across the floor. Jeb dove behind the table, firing wildly. The cabin filled with gun smoke, wood splintering under the bullets. Lila dropped to the floor, crawling toward the rifle rack, fear pounding through her veins. "Aaron," she cried, "I'm here." He reloaded, eyes never leaving the shadows. Jeb's boot scraped against the floorboards too close. Aaron fired again, and the sound of a body hitting the ground followed. Then silence. Smoke hung heavy in the air. Lila's breath came in shallow bursts. "Aaron." He lowered his rifle, scanning the room. "It's over." She stood shakily, her hands pressed to her chest. "Easy." Aaron nodded once. "He won't hurt you again." Her eyes welled with tears, not of fear this time, but release. Aaron crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught her as her knees buckled. She clung to him, trembling. "I thought I know," he murmured, holding her tight. "But you're safe now, you're safe." She buried her face against his chest, sobbing into his shirt as the weight of months of years finally broke. By dusk, the sheriff had come, grim-faced and tired. He took one look at the scene, then at Aaron. Self-defense again. Aaron nodded. "He didn't leave me a choice. Hold inside. Didn't think he'd be fool enough to come back." He wrote up his report and told them both they'd be left in peace now. "Carter's gone for good. You two can rest easy." When the sheriff rode away, the valley fell silent again. Lila stood on the porch, watching the last of the daylight fade behind the mountains. Aaron joined her, his arm brushing hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have had to face that again." She turned to him, eyes still shining from tears. "I wasn't afraid this time." He frowned. "You weren't?" She shook her head. "Because you were here." Aaron's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. So, he reached for her hand and, against Delicaton, she laced her fingers through his. Without hesitation, they stood like that until night fell too. Souls who'd both known too much loss, now holding on to the one thing the world hadn't been able to take, each other. The next morning dawned. Quiet, so quiet, it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Snow still clung to the far hills, but down in the valley, spring had claimed the ground. The air smelled of thawing earth, of pine and wild mint. The storm that had once nearly taken Lila's life was now a distant memory. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled gently. Aaron poured coffee while Lila pulled her shawl tighter, watching the morning light spill across the wooden floorboards. It was strange, she thought, how a place that had once felt like a refuge now felt like home. Aaron handed her the mug, his hand brushing hers. "You sleep at all?" "A little," she said softly. "Kept waking up thinking, I heard horses." He nodded. "It'll take time." But when she looked up, she found his eyes fixed on her, full of something she couldn't name, something tender, deep, and unspoken. "I was thinking," he said finally, clearing his throat, "about the fence line and about you." Her lips curved slightly. "Me and the fence line." He gave a quiet laugh. "Not quite the same subject." "No." He set down his cup, rubbing the back of his neck like a man unsure how to begin. "Lila, when I found you in that snowstorm, I didn't know what I was bringing home. I thought maybe just someone who needed shelter for a night. I never figured I was bringing home my peace." Her heart stilled. "You filled this house again," he went on quietly. "Not just with warmth, or food, or laughter, but with life. And after last night, I realized I can't imagine it empty again." Lila swallowed hard. "Aaron." He stood, coming closer. "I ain't good with words. Never was, but I know this much: you don't have to run anymore. Not from men, not from cold, not from fear, not while I'm breathing." Tears blurred her vision. "Are you saying?" He nodded, his voice low but steady. "I'm asking you to stay. As my wife, not because I saved you, not because I owe you, but because I love you." The words hung in the air like the first light of dawn. For a moment, all Lila could do was stare at his rugged face. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way his hand trembled slightly, like he feared she might say no. She reached up, touching his cheek. "You don't know what those words mean to me," she whispered. "All my life, I've been told I didn't deserve love, that I was too much, or not enough." Aaron caught her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. "Then let me show you what it really means." A single tear slid down her cheek, but she smiled through it. "Yes, Aaron, I'll stay. I'll be your wife." His breath left him in a rush of sound halfway between relief and disbelief. And then he kissed her, softly at first, like he was afraid she'd vanish. Then deeper, with the kind of promise words couldn't hold. When they finally pulled apart, Lila laughed a light, unguarded sound that filled the whole cabin. Aaron brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That laugh," he murmured. "I want to hear it every day." They married a week later beneath the old oak by the creek, with the sheriff and his wife as witnesses. The air smelled of wildflowers and rain. Lila wore a simple white dress, sewn from fabric she'd found in town, and Aaron wore his best shirt, one she'd mended herself. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, a small silver band, carved with a single wild rose's hands, shook. "You sure about this?" she teased softly. "Not one doubt in my bones," he said, smiling. And when the sheriff pronounced them man and wife, Aaron kissed her again, slow and sure, sealing the promise neither of them ever thought they'd have the chance to make. Months passed. The ranch flourished. Lila planted a garden near the porch, and every evening, they'd sit together watching the sunset pour gold over the hills. Sometimes, when the wind blew cold, she'd remember that night in the storm, the snow, the fear, the moment his voice broke through the darkness saying, "You're safe now." And every time, she'd glance at him, strung, steady, hers, and whisper back, "You kept your word." He'd smile and wrap an arm around her shoulders. "Always will, Lila, always." The storm had brought her to him, but love, quiet, steadfast love, had kept her there. The end.